It's a great addition.
Okay. So I'd love to thank you all for coming. When I learned the weather forecast for today, I was pretty anxious. You know, we've had quite a stretch of weather, and everyone wants to get outside desperately. And so seeing you here and making art a priority really does my heart good, and I thank you for your attendance. Also, thank you to David and to Judith for coming and honoring us with this presentation today. Frank Quinn and I were talking at the beginning of the year about ways to celebrate the 60th anniversary of our art association. I had been an active member when it was our 50th anniversary, and I remember having Robert Douglas Hunter come and give a presentation. And so when Frank and I were brainstorming, it was, well, let's have David Curtis come. I remember seeing him give great demonstrations for our art association, and it seemed like a really wonderful continuation of celebrations for Hallmark anniversaries. We're honored to have David here. Like I said about the earlier demonstrations that I had seen him give, like they really made an impact on me. David has a wonderful way of talking about art that really gets me excited and puts me at ease. I was telling him earlier that I had painted with him in Essex a couple of times. He does these great Saturdays at this wonderful Cox Reservation. And I was painting next to Susan Kelly. You might know her. And I was a mess. It was one of my first times painting plein air, and I could do nothing right. I was deluged with green. Nothing was looking correct. And I was thinking of quitting. You know how that is. And David came up and, like, with just a few sentences, I was like, I got this, you know? And so I'm really excited to have him here. He's going to speak for an hour or so. He welcomes interruptions. And so before I turn it over, let me just make sure that I've covered everything. After the slides with interruptions, we'll have a break. We'll reconvene, and he'll take any questions that you might have for him, if there are more that haven't come out during the presentation. So thank you, though, to Frank for your help in organizing this, and to Nancy, who helped so much with our wonderful spread of food. So enjoy, and thank you, and happy anniversary to us.
Thank you very much, Kim, for inviting me in the first place. When I got the email, I was a little taken back because I thought this was a job for an old guy. And, I really did. And I thought, I wonder why she said, well, I'm honored. I'm honored because she feels I know enough about these old, but gee, Judy, am I an old guy? She looked at me and she said, yes, you're an old guy. Yeah. And and I thought about it, and I thought what I could do. She more or less left it up to me. And so I thought if I just honed in on my life and then how I connected up to all these people, other artists throughout my life, and how they made it important to me as a painter and how they enriched my life. My dad always said, the nicest people in the world, the people involved in the arts. And that's whether they're collectors, whether they're painters, whether they're dealers, whatever they do, but if they're involved in the arts or have an interest in the arts, they're the greatest people in the world. You'll never go wrong. And he was absolutely correct, And so with that, I was fortunate enough. This is my father here, myself on the right, and my older brother. And this is the family of four of us. But my father wanted to be a painter, wanted to go off to art school. And his father said his older brother, Howard, was already gone to Mass Normal Art School and was going to be teaching art. So he said, one in the family's enough, Roger. You go into business school, into discussion. So my father went off to business school, became an accountant, worked for the wool business in Boston. And when he realized that the wool business was about to collapse after the war, he said, what am I going to do? So he left. He went out. He was always painting on his own. So he took up an office on Newbury Street, opened up a gallery, started teaching, and he really got his start there in Boston on Newbury Street. So this is my father's work. Roger Curtis was known as a marine painter. So my brothers and I, we all three of us take credit for the stormy seas. We hossed around a lot upstairs, and the calm, placid sea would turn into a raging storm. And so my father, I think, accepted the fact. But I think he, of all people, captured water and air mixed together and could get this feeling of the ocean. We all marveled at it. None of it. My middle brother paints a little seascapes now and then, but my older brother and I, we're people who paint landscapes. So we can really admire what my dad was doing. And these are major, these are 40, 50 paintings that he did. I think Raytheon has a collection of some of my dad's in the boardroom. So I got my start with, my father was my first teacher, I'd say it. And he was a very generous man. He said, you guys, any of you three want to paint? Here's the easel, here are the brushes, the paints, help yourself. Just clean up your mess. And we always feared the critiques. My brothers and I, did you ask Dad for a critique? Nah, I did not this time. Because he'd really give it to you. I mean, he'd really diminish your ego down as little as it was when we were kids into even shorter. But wonderful feeling of the anatomy of the wave here. One of the secrets he taught me if I was to do a wave was the continuous line when you design it, because it just happens like lickety-split, is over here, and then if you see the line goes underneath the wave and connects up all the way to the other side. So he would start with this sort of arabesque or rhythmic line to create the whole wave in one go. They didn't paint on location. He would bring us out to location. Raging storms, I think it was, I don't know, one of the hurricanes coming up the coast in August. And we were going over there, and the boulders were up on the road at Bass Rocks. And in those days, the police didn't stop you from going because they said nobody's stupid enough to go out there, right? Well, we were. So we would drive around the boulders and arrive at a spot, and he'd say, okay, you guys, I'm just going to, and he would just memorize everything. And I'm 10 years old now, and this guy's standing there just taking memory pictures of what he's seen. And he was also, as I say, a dealer, so he organized shows. And he'd always bring his 3 sons along to help schlep the paintings. And he'd always test us. He would be driving down the road. He'd say, there was a house 2 doors back. What color were the windows? What color were the shutters? What color? And this memory game he would play with us. We just thought it was a game of memory. But he really, I understood then, many years later, that it was his training of his memory and how important it is in painting to train your memory. I mean, some of the most beautiful things you'll see, you're driving down the highway and there's a moonrise. And the moon's bigger than life. And you say, gee, if only I had my easel or I had a camera or something. So it's your memory. It's training your memory. So if you went home at that point in time, did a little sketch of it, at least you're getting that going in your memory. So he was, and like I said, he's a fabulous father. And a friend, a father, a friend, and a fellow companion when we went painting. One of the last things and one of the best teaching moments I had about my father before I go on to his older brother, who they didn't like each other, but that's beside the point. But I was painting in his garden. I've been painting for many years, and brought it in. And just before I packed up, I realized I needed a light rock coming out of the surface of the grass. So I brought the painting in. He says, Dave, can I look at what you did? He said, sure, Dad. He put it up. He says, you need a light note right there. I says, you know, Dad, I thought of the same thing. He says, but you didn't do it. And that was the lesson. You know, when you see the mistake, correct it. Do it right then and there. Don't wait, because you might not ever do it. So that was the learning point. And that's sort of the theme of what I'm going to talk about here is I didn't sometimes study directly with these painters I'm going to talk about, but the learning points were so tremendous over a lifetime. So my uncle was my high school art teacher. He went to the Mass Normal Art School, and that's what the normal school did, was to train people to teach. So Munsell was one of their teachers, Edmund Munsell, with the color theory. They learned dynamic symmetry. They learned, it was really a great school, and that became the Mass Art now. That's the Mass Normal Art School became Mass Art. And great teachers and a great program, professional painters there. So my uncle was the high school art teacher, and he really felt that it was almost impossible to teach these kids how to draw from a desk in a classroom. So he spent more time with the understanding of thinking about painting. He felt an artist was an eclectic kind of person. He thought about many things and looked into many things. Did not say, that's not for me, this is for me. It wasn't politics. It wasn't this side's my side, this side's the other side. It was open-minded. Be open-minded about it. Accept more, reject less. One of the first classes when I went to Howard's class, I was a freshman, was he had a little dot on the blackboard. And underneath it, it said, this is a line 1 mile long. And then he had a straight line next to it. It said, this is a circle. Prove it. So we sat there for 40 minutes, and he would not give that away, what it was, what the answers were. I mean, we just come from history, or, you know, made all sense, logical sense. But this guy's got these wacko ideas. So the next day, he got a little impatient, started giving us hints. And of course, the line 1 mile long is you're at the end of the line looking at the point, the dot of the line, you know, and all you have to do is poke your head up a little bit above the horizon, you see that line take off, you know. Or the circle was in perspective. It was a plate on its side. And then as soon as that plate went up, and that was the beginning of what he taught us, was we had to do a lot of perspective drawing to start with and understanding perspective. He himself, though, I thought was a fabulous artist, fabulous painter in his own right. And they both painted the sea, two brothers. As I said, they weren't always in agreement with each other, but both painted these stormy seas. I think Howard was a little bit more literal or more symbolic in his interpretation of the sea. Obviously, it looks like a shipwreck, and these two people are coming down to either salvage these things from the shipwreck. He seems to have a chest in his hand. Wonderful sense of composition here again. But Howard's things, I think one of the classes I went to, he had one of his paintings up there, and it was just a cliff, back of a cliff, and a beach, and there was a big root, a big tree trunk, all the roots of the tree, and it was just shining glistening with the wet of the water. It was a fabulous painting, and I think I said a year later, I said, hey, where's that painting of the tree stump? I don't know what you're talking about. He was an unusual man. He read the biography of George Innes, and Innes in his book always changed things. I think one of the stories behind Innes was his son came in and Georgie wrote the book. So Georgie was in the studio. He says, Georgie, why don't you go out and play? So he gets rid of him. And then, so Georgie comes in from playing 3 hours later, and he's looking around for the painting his father did. And so he looked for the wettest painting he could find. And he started off with an autumn piece, but the only painting there that was wet was a winter piece. So like that, my uncle did this a lot, would change these paintings midstream. Also, too, remember what Kim said, so don't be afraid of, speak right up if you have a question about anything. This is my older brother, Alan. Again, he was a big influence. He was 8 years older than I was. He was a great draftsman, could draw anything. And and he was a great teacher for me. He really was. And he showed me, I think, one of the things, because he could draw, like put the pencil down on a piece of paper and in one continuous line, draw an elephant or draw anything. He just had this wonderful ability, one talent.
Pardon me, is that a self-portrait?
No, that's just a photograph of him. With those are his paintings, his two girls, and these are his paintings here.
Thank you.
Yeah. And as I said, he was a good teacher as well. He taught me a lot about painting. I did not have the ability to draw, and later on I learned why. You know, why he could draw so well and I couldn't. This is one of his paintings. He had 6 children, so he delivered all his own children. So one of the things he realized, he had to give up oil paints and paint acrylics. So he picked up acrylics, but the acrylics always looked like oils. He was an oil painter for many years and then picked up these acrylics. So I think he really mastered that. And he's still painting today. living in California. Interesting story about his kids. His oldest boy was born deaf and dumb. German measles came in the house and his wife got it. So, and he still looks after him today. Well, his name was Titus. And if you know anything about art history, that was Rembrandt's oldest son was Titus. And Titus lived with Rembrandt his whole life. And then his other son was named Theo. And everybody knows the story of Van Gogh and Theo. And Theo looked after. Well, Theo just bought my brother a house in Northern California just to get him closer to his family and the other kids. So he was very lucky in the naming of his kids, right? Alan always told me this was his backyard where he lived in Tucson. I don't know if it was his backyard, but he liked to tell me that. But it's a beautiful painting, and he was a master at painting these landscapes. He loved the desert. He loved the colors of the desert, and I think this is a great example of his work. And he was really a good. The lesson I learned from him, I think, was when I was very young, is how to make a shrub. And it was the first lesson of somebody, and I thought about this many years later, that he showed me, you just take these colors, Dave, because I couldn't draw the thing, and you just take reds and blues and purples, and you just keep on making these strokes, like almost like brush strokes, till you get to the top. Then you lighten it up, put some yellows up there, put some golds up there. And that created the form with just these little dots of color, you know, like an impressionist would. And so he never taught. He never wanted to teach. Said he didn't have the patience for it. But I think he would have been a great teacher if he did, because he taught me a real lot. Alan's a great guy, and we're hoping one of the things that this is sort of producing too is at the same time is a Curtis family show somewhere on Cape Ann. And there's 5 of us in the family, Howard, my father, and my 2 brothers, myself. This is my middle brother, William, and you've heard the phrase, the champagne appetite and the beer pocketbook. Well, that was my older brother and I, because we painted regularly. But my middle brother went out and worked for a living, so he drank the champagne. And then he reached retirement, and he says to me as he's retiring, Dave, I want to get you a lot of your advice, whatever you want. And he said, well, one of the things I want to know is he's moved to Maine, and I think I'll need a part-time job, don't you? I says, what are you talking about? He says, well, I'm just going to be painting. I need a part-time. Now he says, I don't have enough time in the day to paint. And it's a full-time occupation. And he's really taken off with it. He loves it, and that's what he's doing. He lives up in Damascotta, Maine. But he was always painting. He lived in Connecticut, and this is one of the streams in Connecticut. So this is a very early piece of his. He always had it, but you know, the work ethic is really important in painting. The more you do, the better you get. And he's learning that now. He's really developing good. So this is an example of his early piece. Yes.
About your brother who could draw.
Yes.
He mentioned that he could draw, you couldn't.
Right.
So,
That's coming up,
okay.
Kim. It's,
All right. So we'll save it then.
yeah, because of that very fact that I could not draw, and why I just didn't draw as well. He was a great example. I mean, he really set the tone for the whole family. I think because my 2 brothers and I all went out and painted. My sister didn't. My sister was very talented. She could have painted too, but she wanted to raise a family. So I think the biggest problem we had was my mother was a little disappointed. She wanted a carpenter, a plumber, an electrician, and she got 3 artists. And we all thought, we were together once, and we said, well, why do you suppose we all became painters? Because it made it look so good, you know. He was just down there painting all day, you know. And one of the stories I have about my father was on 4th of July, I think. We were all painters, and we're all together. He says, gee, what do you say, guys? Let's go out and paint together. Great idea, Dad, let's go. He says, you guys pick the spot, I'll follow you. So we said, okay. I think Claude Monet was shown at the MFA or something, and it was the lily pond scenes that we loved. And so we went out, we took him to this great lily pond. And he looks at us, we're all taller than him, and he says, you guys are my sons? I mean, this is a place for a nap. The flowers are blooming, the bees are buzzing, the frogs are croaking. What do you want me to do here? And we just, well, we're sorry, Dad. I mean, we can go someplace else, but And you know, here's another learning point. He would go back to that pond over and over and over again to really get something. What did the kids see here? I don't know, but to learn, you know. And he was a teacher always. I mean, he was dying. My dad was dying. He had hospice. And students were calling. Is Roger got a class tomorrow? I'm sorry, no, he doesn't. Well, I'll call back next week. Well, okay. So this is my brother. This is Pemmican Light, if you know Maine, coast of Maine. Pemmican, the lighthouse just to be over here in the pines. And this is the little beach next to it. And this is where my brother's been painting. And he really, of the three of us, he's the only one that sort of picked up my dad's love of the ocean, I think. And he does wonderful stormy seas. So he's really taking off, I think, up there in Maine. He does very good. He still comes down and he says, I'll take you out for dinner if you give me a critique. Okay. He doesn't need a critique. This is my own work. My wife's English. She's from Yorkshire, England. My father, she was taking a workshop with my father in Rockport. And my father came home and he says, Dave, you got to meet this cute English girl. I said, Dad, I'm not taking your advice on cute women. You know, you're my father. What do you know? You know, obviously he knew a lot, right? See, we doubt our fathers aren't looking, right? We don't think the fathers are looking. They're doing other stuff, right? But he was looking. So we went on a painting trip for 2 weeks. And so I'm at the airport sending Judy home after 2 weeks. And I proposed to her. I said, will you marry me at the airport? And she says, you're drunk. So I thought, off she went. So Bill, my other brother, says, well, did you ask her? I said, yeah. What'd she say? She said I was drunk, but I think she's thinking yes. So Judy returned home and said to her mother, an artist just proposed to me. She says, well, what did he propose? You know, because her mother was a bit of an artist too. So, you know, she was probably picturing this artist saying, come up and pose nude for me for 3 weeks and we'll see what happens, you know. But no, it's wonderful. I mean, we've been together for 30 years, and you know, love at first sight. I guess that's so true. And she's so she was homesick to go back to, and I loved England. We'd go over there and visit the in-laws, and I would set up and paint. So I thought, oh, a year over there would be fabulous, and it is. It was absolutely gorgeous over there. And we moved out into the country. This is Yorkshire, and this is the heather that everybody talks about. The heather in Yorkshire. And it was just fabulous to go out there. This is a good-sized painting. I think the Diamond Walnut Company owns this. But I loved painting there. I loved painting because the skies, it was like time-lapse photography. The skies would just roll through, and it was always changing. It was always doing something new. And once I got used to that, then there is another reason why I always looked this way, which is this is due east. So, and the sun's over here in the afternoon. Was when I first set up there, they have low-flying aircraft, the British, in these coming out of York, and they would come out of that area there. And when I used to be out painting, I was obviously a target because those jets were really low. I mean, the guy would be waving at you. You could wave back. Low-flying aircraft, and it scared me the first time. So after that, I always faced east, just so I could see him coming. But I loved England. I loved painting there. And this is more contemporary. This is Cape Ann. This is Good Harbor Beach. A little bit more of what I'm doing presently. I did this last summer. I did this last fall. This is Arcadia. This is the Hunter's Moon, October. It was the first time I think I went to Arcadia that late in October and I think one of my students is now writing a paper on what she's calling the emoji, or the natural emoji, which is one continuous line throughout the whole painting. In this case, you can sort of see the one continuous line is a warm line. So if you follow the warm foreground, it picks up the rocks, it picks up and then it continues over. So there's like a big S pattern. So it's that warm tone with the two cool accents, the blue sky and the blue water, that sort of complete the painting. So the oneness in a painting is more important than anything else. Whether you get a nice pine cone painted on your tree or not, or get the eagles flying overhead, it's not as important as the bigness of it all. Because that's what nature does, take that thing in. Any questions? Go right ahead.
What medium
These are oils.
They're all
Yep, we're all of us are oil. Like I say, Alan's an acrylic painter.
And the one in England, is that the area where all the British watercolors used to, like Constable? and-
Yorkshire, Constable, not Constable. Constable was down south, but that's Turner took trips through Yorkshire. Yeah, yeah.
Beautiful.
No, Yorkshire is beautiful, and it really didn't change that much. It's still very agrarian society. A lot of open space in towns and everything.
Except for the planes.
Where?
Except for the
For the low-flying aircraft, and they were just having too much fun with me. That was the problem there. But anyway, that's the family.
Another question though.
I'm sorry, I can ask any time. So I have a little trouble with this, but how do you know when you're finished?
Oh,
Huh?
how do you know when you're finished?
Would you finish with the painting? Oh, you never are. Never. I have paintings in the studio now that I'm still looking at, still finding problems with, and anybody who comes in, Judy, my mom, students of mine, what do you think? What's wrong with that painting? And if it rings a bell, I'll make the changes. My wife had to interview Donald Stone. Don Stone, the great watercolor oil painter, passed away recently. And my wife had to interview him because she's a writer, an author of many books on the Cape Ann Art School. And she writes, if you get the American Art Review, she writes many articles in the American Art Review. So anyway, so Don Stone, she had heard so many wild stories about Don Stone. She said to me, well, will you come? I said, why? Well, you told those stories. I said, they're just stories. They don't mean anything. She says, well, I said, he's a nice guy. Forget about it. So anyway, I tagged along, luckily. Because if I get together with my artist friends, we never talk about painting or how you paint or anything like that. We talk about baseball or football or some dumb thing like that. But we never talk shop. And so because Don was being interviewed, he was talking shop. And he was his gallery, we're in his gallery, what looked to be his gallery. And he said, and I said, Judy said, so your whole theory here? She says, well, I think art is a problem to be solved. A painting is a problem to be solved. And great answer, great answer. He says, now, see this painting over here? I think I got it. This has been out on shows. It's won a prize. It's come back to me, and I'm still working on it. And he would go over and move the frame and take the painting from out underneath it. It was just sitting inside it. Then bring it over to his easel and work on it. So you'd sit there. And it's an endless process. There's an old saying that it takes one artist to paint it, but another artist to take the brush out of your hand. So sometimes you can do too much. And that's happened to me, yeah, many times. Right? Judy will say, where's that painting you were working? I have no idea. So there is a kennel. It is that. It's a problem to be solved. To me, it's like a chess game. And you're playing, on the computer with yourself. You're the black and the white, but it's in the middle of the game. It's no longer the beginning or the end. Who cares who wins? It's just that thinking process that you're doing in the middle of the game to figure it out. And I love it. It's frustrating at times, but maybe tomorrow. One of my students was from way down south, Memphis, and she walked by to me and looked at me and she said, David, there's always tomorrow. I said, yeah, Scarlett, right? She said, yep, that's right. So this is my first teacher. I was 17 years old. My dad's best friend was Ken Gore, painted with a palette knife, and so he took me on as a student, not really as a student, but he would give me advice. Marvelous painter, loved painting out of doors, so I think the learning lesson for me with Ken was, because I was 17, was Gloucester Harbor in the fog, and the fog was really heavy duty, and I thought I was doing pretty good. Ken comes up to me and says, Dave, I think you're light all over, too light all over. And he says, come on over and look at mine. So I lean over to his, I says, I think yours is too dark. I was a 17-year-old kid, right? And then, so luckily he has this white card in his pocket, he hauls it out and puts it up. What do you think of that? I looked at the white card and I looked at the fog and I said, wow, it's really dark. And I looked at his, yours is perfect. And I looked at mine, I said, that's terrible. So he was a wonderful teacher because he had that card in his pocket, like a rabbit out of a hat, right? He could produce it. It was what's the phrase that it's not the magician, it's the magic, and that was the lesson to be learned that day was key your painting correctly. Stormy day, cloudy day, it's a little lower key. Sunny day, brighter key. I was in that middle key. So, so he was my first landscape painter, a big influence, and on me. And you have another one of Ken's. I think this is a beautiful piece of Ken's. Like I said, it's all painted with knife. Yet he could use the knife in such a skillful way as to get all the texture in the bark of the trees, the lambs under the trees. Wonderful artist, wonderful designer. I think one of the things he came up to me and I was doing a wild rose bush. He says, David, those roses are so perfectly placed. They're exactly evenly spaced on all that whole shrub. And I says, oh, thanks, Ken. And of course, I knew what he meant. You know. It didn't look, it wasn't a fractal anymore, right? We understand fractal geometry tells us everything. And look at that tree. It's a great example of how he understands the fractals of nature.
He painted with a knife?
He painted with a palette knife, yeah. He felt he was not good enough with a brush, so he painted with a knife. He was very good with a brush, but he had a color system that he used, and so he could lay in. He also painted with his memory. He could lay in a painting with a wash, and that would represent what he would mix with the knife. And of course, you all know that if you've ever taken some Cape Cod lessons with some of the Provincetown group, that you get purer color if you use a knife. And he did. But so what we would set up at 7 o'clock, and I would just wait for the sun to move. So I was anticipating what the sun would do, and he was painting what the sun did at 7 o'clock, which was more of a beautiful effect of light and shade. But he had that ability, that wonderful ability to remember and paint a scene that way. Great guy. We were friends the rest, as long as he lived. So I was about 17 when I did that. So I went to museum school, and the museum school didn't want any part of me, so I went over to Vesper George. And Vesper George was a commercial art school. So the president there came in, I showed him my portfolio. He starts putting the pictures up around the room. Well, these are pretty good. Okay, $600 and you're in. So I was in. So, but there I met Robert Douglas Hunter and Robert Cormier. And they were the teachers at the Vesper George School of Art. And Bob knew my dad. My dad had handled a lot of his paintings, sold a lot of his paintings through what he called the New England Artists Group. And Bob Cormier was also a very good teacher there. And Bob said to me, what are you doing here? What do you want to do? And I told him I wanted to be more of a fine artist than a commercial artist. He said, all right, maybe I can. So we arranged a meeting with his teacher, which R.H. Ives Gamble, who was ran a great school in Boston Atelier. It was a very rare circumstance to meet him. And this was Ives Gamble's landscape. But he was more known as an imaginative painter, more allegorical type paintings. And so when I went to meet him, it was around the Christmas break, end of my first semester at Vesper George, and he gave me a test to see if I could accept the teaching. And so I set up, and because there it was right back to the beginnings of the atelier system, which goes all the way back to the Renaissance and then handed down through the years, in which you had to just draw. And this is why I was fortunate enough to meet R.H. Ives Gamble, because as I said before, I was not a good draftsperson, couldn't draw well. And his drawing method was this ancient method of what they call sight size, so like a portrait artist. So the cast was set up here, and I did a black and white drawing right next to it. And he made us measure everything. So the top of the cast here was the top of the head here, the chin, everything right on down. And it was great because as soon as he saw my drawing, he said, oh, you're farsighted. He knew my eyes just like that. And I was farsighted, but and he knew because I was making everything a little too big from that right depth perception. And he was a great teacher, a great artist. He knew so much about art history. I was, like I said, I was 18 years old. I was young enough to accept all his teachings. And he could speak, he was tutored during his lifetime, so he could speak Latin, not Latin, but he read Latin, French, Greek, Italian. He was a brilliant man, great art historian, but like I said, he had this liking for the unusual. I think one of the last times we'd go out to Williamstown. This is, I think, is Provincetown, but we'd go out to Williamstown in the summertime where he had a school out there. And he could lecture for that 3-hour drive to Williamstown from here, and on one subject the whole way. And they were brilliant lectures. You know, I was just so lucky. So we were there, and one year we got a beginner, a neophyte, in the class to go out there. And he had never met Gamble. So the first time he met Gamble, we said, now he's a little eccentric, so just be aware. So he went in there and he came back and he had this shocked look on his face. We said, well, you're okay, Charlie. You haven't seen. He says, well, he wore a Brooks Brothers suit but a smock on top of it. He was allergic to the turpentine, so he used to wear the washing up rubber gloves like this. He was totally bald. But this one day he's doing a self-portrait in the mirror. So he's got a rag on his head to make him look like a monk, right? And on the floor he has tarot cards, right? So Charlie's a little stunned by all this. And Charlie says, well, he had these funny cards on the floor. Well, my friend, who was a Yale graduate and studying with, he took the liberty of saying, uh-oh, it's going to be one of those summers. Now look, Charlie, don't worry about a thing. He's not very good at it. Not very good at what? Well, he thinks he can practice black magic, but he's no good at it. You know, so don't worry about a thing. And the look on the poor kid's face, you know. So everything that happened that was a little off that summer was because of the cards, you know. So we had a lot of fun with Charlie. Years later, I met Charlie when I was working in Boston at the Guild. And he said, do you remember me? I says, I'm sorry. He says, I'm Charlie Yetton. I says, oh, I do remember Charlie. And he says, I said, so you knew we were joking, right? He says, well, for the first 2 weeks, I was really scared. So Charlie, but Gamble was a wonderful teacher. He really knew how to get the point across. And like I said, my problems with drawing occurred with him. He was 77 when I came to him as a student. So he didn't give me much hands-on how to do the cast drawing step by step. Anyone here know about the BARG system? The BARG system. No, the BARG system is what's his first name? Charles. Charles Bargue. If you look it up, he was Jerome in France's drawing instructor, and now it's really caught on. There's Bargue drawing schools everywhere. There might even be an online Bargue drawing, B-A-R-Q-U-E. G-U-E, I'm sorry. Bargue drawing classes everywhere. I know there's one in Boston, but it's really a great system of learning to draw. And so Gamble, though, didn't quite teach exactly the Bargue system. So he taught what you call the potato shape. You get the shape what you think it is, and then you make it better. Bargue teaches more angles, like a sculpting method. So you get the angle right of the side of the head. You get the angle going down to the chin. And by getting the angles, then you refine the angles, and that's the way he does it, which is, like I said, it's a great method. And my son learned a lot with one summer of copying the Bargue book. So it really will accelerate your drawing if you look into it. I don't know about the courses, but the book itself is worth it. Anyway, Gamble's students, Robert Douglas Hunter, you guys all know Bob Hunter. He's a wonderful, and he became a teacher of mine afterwards. But Bob was studied with Ives Gamble for many years, I think about 6, 7 years, and went down the Cape when Gamble would go down the Cape in the summertime. And Bob became a good friend. He was a teacher of mine. After I left Gamble, I thought I was going to be a studio painter, still lifes and interiors and portraits. And so I said, Bob, could you help me out a little bit? And he said, sure, I'll give you critiques, no problem. And then I got very familiar, and I would say, yeah, when I was 40 years old, I'd see Bob, and we're chatting. I said, Bob, can I ask you a personal question? I said, how could you paint those blankety-blank bottles and jugs over and over again? And he looks at me, he says, yeah, frankly, David, I'm not painting jugs and bottles. I'm making a design. And when he said that, boom, that was it. I mean, that was the learning moment right there. If you look at the design of this, forget about the jugs and bottles and how well they're polished. The three dark objects, dark here and the 2 over there. The tangerines down here. The 2 blue cool things in the background. The pyramidal shape that he's got in the big look of this. So he enlightened me that we aren't. And I thought, you know, at the time I was painting landscapes. I said, yeah, when I look at a tree, I don't see a tree. I see a design. You know, I know I don't see a tree. I don't identify trees. And that's what Bob was doing. And so that was the 2x4 over the head that day. But sometimes you have to dig for those lessons, you know. And so even when Bob wasn't my teacher, he was still my teacher. And I think it was a great lesson that Bob had. So Bob was a good friend of William Paxton and his wife Elizabeth Paxton. And R.H. Ives Gamble studied with William Paxton. And Paxton went on and studied with Jerome in Paris and came back home. This slide is dear to me because this is a hotel in Gloucester. It's called the Little Hotel. And Paxton and his wife, Elizabeth, used to stay there and paint there in Gloucester. And this one I'm going to ask you a question about, because this sort of points out the whole idea of the visual experience. So where is the sharpest edge in this painting? Anybody? The sharpest edge?
The finger?
Is it the finger? Is it the finger? So what's the sharpest edge here? Don't be frightened. You could be right, you could be wrong, it doesn't matter. The fencing in the foreground, right in front of us, right? So his focus is the fencing. Just like the lens of a camera, our eyes are like lenses. He's focusing on this. So even his wife's face is a little blurry, right? If he had focused on her, then this would probably be blurry. And the critics in Boston hated this painting because why did he have that beautiful woman out of focus? You know? And it was this binocular vision experiment that he was conducting here. It was a good sized painting, 25 by 30. So here, if you focus on that, he's saying if you focus on these sharp edges here, out of the corner of your eye, that's what he'll see. And he's carried that experiment beautifully in this painting to say what is in focus and what is out of focus. This is what Impressionism is really all about. We like to think it's little dots and dabs of bright colors put on a canvas. It has nothing to do with color. Impressionism is about the vision, how we see, and the impression of what we see in life. If I'm doing a painting and I look at this stone over here and find the stone, then I look over here and see this tree, then he's doing it right. He's saying, no, one focus, one focal point, everything in relation to the focus, and that's true Impressionism. If you look at the two champions for these Boston school painters were Vermeer and Velasquez. And if you look at Vermeer and you look at his paintings, you'll find that there's a sharp edge in something, and then everything else is sort of soft-edged around it. The lost and found in a painting. Vermeer, and interesting enough, if you've ever seen that movie, the movie about Vermeer, it's usually a letter that the lady is holding in her hand that's very edgy, but her face isn't quite there. And so I guess that didn't want to ask his wife. They had 11 children, and it looks like she's pregnant every time she's being painted. And I'm guessing where she was Catholic, he was Protestant, that he was celebrating the birth of that child by doing the painting, because he didn't do that many paintings. But that's just, I don't know, it's just a wild guess. But if you look, he probably had the costume on a Lulu, a dummy, and then it asked his wife to come up and pose for a short time. But Vermeer, if you look at Vermeer's, you'll see this same binocular vision. And also Velasquez, the famous painting Les Meninas by Velasquez, has this idea of focus. What's in focus and what's lost in focus. And it's as you go away from the center. But it is like the lens of a camera. If you focus in on a butterfly or something, then everything behind it is sort of in a blur. And so he was practicing that here. Beautiful. I think it's beautiful. And as I say, Bob Hunter was a big admirer of his. So this is probably a nice Bob Hunter painting and we see the lost and found in this painting, right? How he's losing the grapefruits over here. You don't even see them. How he's lost things on the other side in order to bring the eye into the middle. So where's the focal point here, anybody? Would you say was the focus? The orange, the grapefruit over there? I think that little white stone, right? These white stones, the 3 white stones, are the focal point, I think. Because even the dish is lost edge, see it? And if you look closely, you'll see this cross-hatching in the painting, in the dish. So when these kind of still lifes begin, there's a lot of cross-hatching, there's a lot of blurriness in the edges. So when they finished like their first day in, they would go back in and spend about an hour blurring all their edges with a brush, cross-hatching almost every edge. Then they'd go back and repaint it. And that gave this sort of sense of atmosphere around everything that was really good. because once you put that next color over the previous color, that's still there underneath, and it would show through and soften the edges. So it was the Boston School, wonderful technique, and I really, really, really enjoyed the technique. I was learning a lot from the Boston School. My other teacher at Vesper George was Robert Cormier. And even though I never really studied, I think I did take a class. If anyone here has taken a portrait class with Bob many years ago when he was teaching, wonderful teacher, really great teacher, great guy. Again, like most artists that you've all met, and you guys here too, or most of you, how many here are artists? How many here are painters, right? Watercolors, right? Oil painters, right? Sculptors, philosophers, poets, musicians. Good. See, it's all tied in, and they're very eccentric, right? You're all very eccentric, right? And Bob was very eccentric. I remember one day going to his studio. We were supposed to go out and look at this man's collection to build a show at the Guild of Boston Artists. And Bob said, "I just need my wallet, Dave, and we can go." So I'm looking around for his wallet, and here's a new wallet here in a box in the window. I said, "This one, Bob?" He's not that one. And there's another wallet. He had at least 10 wallets just lying around the studio. It wasn't the wallet. So I think he was a believer in some of these Oriental cults that, like Fortuny, to attract the fortune, to bring in the. I don't know what they were doing there. They'd still have the price tag on. Lost and found. Look at these edges in those flowers, right? That's a beautiful sense of feeling. And that lost and found, what does it do? It gives you a feeling of 3D. It almost feels like this flower's on the other side in that bouquet. And the flower's sitting here. He was a wonderful, wonderful painter. I think Bob and my learning, like I said, I studied a little bit, but the best lesson I got from Bob, started to do some landscapes. I was on the Charles River painting a landscape, and he came up, and in a half-hour time, he gave a lecture on the history of landscape painting like I couldn't believe. And just, it was brilliant, absolutely brilliant. I was, I wasn't at the stage, well, Bob, time for you to go so I can paint, And it wasn't that way at all. He was really interesting, entertaining, and no, he was a genius. You'll see, I think the next slide here is a wonderful portrait of Bob's, and it's just amazing what he could do. And his best portraits were of this ilk, these characters, But the portrait I used to show in the Guild window was this beautiful blonde girl, and people would come in and want to buy it. It was so well done. He said, no, that's a gathering piece. That's how I'm going to get my commissions, is off that piece. I mean, that piece is worth $50,000. And I said, well, this guy really wants it. He's offered 75. He said, no, I don't want it. And so, because it was a gathering piece. But beautiful, here again, lost and found, right, everybody? The chiaroscuro, everybody knows what that means in Italian. Any Italians here could interpret that? But I've been told, found in light and lost in shadow, is basically what it means. And he's exhibited here, right, beautifully. And look at how many, this is all, obviously we're looking at images here, but look how many cool green tones there are to those warm tones. And that's how he turns the form wonderfully, because warm colors and cool colors have a wonderful sense of turning the form. That warm red ear over there and all the red notes in there, and then the cool notes, that really helps him turn the form. Beautiful piece by Bob. So I was lucky. I was very fortunate to have these gentlemen as my teachers, you might say, in Boston. And so, but my still lifes were like the teapot, the teaspoon, and the teacup. It was a little too obvious. It was boring, really boring. And I was bored painting them. I said, well, I got to do something better. And I didn't, I saw what Bob did. Bob just chose any subject. Like I said, he was designing. He didn't care about what the object was. If it worked, it worked. A screwdriver or a hammer he put in there. So, so I decided maybe this isn't for me. Maybe landscapes are for me. So I went back, because my first teacher, Ken Gore, was a landscape painter. I went back to Gloucester, moved in with the folks, and they were really tickled to see me back home, in the basement, But because my dad was happy that I was there, because I was going to paint. And this is one of my first attempts at going outdoors to paint a landscape back then. And I hadn't seen this in years. My wife found this somewhere online. And it was really wonderful to see, because I got a lot of compliments from Bob. Matter of fact, Bob Cormier complimented me on this. He said, I know you were outdoors painting this. and you didn't do it from a slide because every rooftop has a different color shade of shadow on it. And he said, that tells me a lot about what you did. And that was a big compliment for me. In this particular painting, it was a Sunday afternoon, and I had started this painting, and my mother was a little fed up that I was trying to paint and not do anything, right? So she says, I thought you said you wanted to paint. It's a beautiful day. I says, it's Sunday. I'm going to watch a football game. She says, you're going out and you're going to paint. So she forced me out the door to paint. And when I saw this painting, I said, wow, I'm glad she forced me out the door to paint. Right? And it was really a lot of fun to do. Late autumn. So this is a hill behind our house overlooking Riverdale. So we'll have a
little break now.
You guys want a break? You're thirsty? No. No?
How long will it take you to do this?
This piece, probably 3 or 4 sittings. Yeah. And it's probably done in those days with working the background, working the middle ground, working the foreground last, that sort of thing. And I would change that technique, as time went on.
We're halfway through.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, have a drink.
it might be a nice little time to check in, say hi, and have refreshments. But I told you we could
Start up again. Bring your. Yeah, where's your whip? All right, everybody. I'm going to give away the top secrets of how to create a masterpiece. In about 2 minutes, you will know step by step how to make a $1 million painting. Guaranteed. Okay? So as I said, I returned home from the Boston school, where that focus was much more on painting interiors and painting still lifes and portraits. And I made my decision that I'll try landscapes. And if that doesn't work, I got such a great education. I could go to any museum in the world and appreciate the beautiful paintings that were done by great painters. And I think that's important. Art appreciation is very important. You know, we were talking about this with my wife, and years ago in the 40s and the 50s, you got 3 or 4 newspapers. Every one of those newspapers had 2 or 3 art columns in it, right? And after the sports page and the financial page, and you'd turn to that art page, I wonder if there's anything good showing in Boston. And now, where are those art critics? You know, very few art critics. And so it's very important that we have art appreciation. And I really think it's important, not just what I'm doing here today, but anywhere we can find something to appreciate the arts, because this is the safe haven. I mean, look what's going on in the world today. Anything could happen, right? Sad to say, but art is a safe haven, and has been over all the things. I mean, I tell my students this story. Just think way back when you're in a little Middle Eastern village, and you're you put stars on pots for the king, right? Well, some army comes in, beheads the king, captures all the generals, comes up to you and says, my king likes trees. I can do trees. Trees. It's a safe haven. It's something we can all appreciate, and without too much debate. So I returned home, and luckily enough, Cape Ann was loaded with great artists. My father happened to, at this point in time, my father was Aldro Hibbard's agent and dealer. So I was fortunate enough to meet Aldro Hibbard. And so when I'm down there, I said, Mr. Hibbard, you're fabulous. He said, yeah. He said, so I said, could you tell me your medium? That stuff's not important, kid. Just go out and work at it. See you later. And that was it. You got to work at it, right? And Hibbard would not talk shop. I think my dad told the story once that this gentleman came in, and as I said, he was selling paintings to buy one of his Hibbard's paintings, and he looked over, and there was Mr. Hibbard way over there by the fireplace. He said, is that Mr. Hibbard? My father said, yes, it is. Could I speak to him? Sure. So he went over and said, Mr. Hibbard, I just want to say I think your paintings are the best, and I can now afford one of your great paintings. I can't wait to buy it. Yeah, that's good. Did you watch last night's game? Hibbard could have been a professional baseball player. He loved baseball. He was from Dorchester High. I think he graduated from Dorchester. Big guy, and could have been a great baseball player, and followed baseball all his life. He was the Rockport Town team manager, but he loved baseball. So he's telling this guy about, now it was the 3rd inning. There was a runner at 2nd and 3rd. Now see, I would have laid down a bunt, but they didn't do that. But they, all these things, the guy came over to my father and said, I just came down to buy a painting. I don't know anything about baseball. And my father said, we'll arrange something when he's not here. He says, that'll be a good idea. So, but he was that kind of a guy. So we had a great show, I think 2014, at Rockport Art of Aldro Hibbard's. And each show that we've had there, I learned more and more. And I really took it in that he spent 7 years in art school. 4 years at the Mass Normal Art School, where he had great teachers, great professional teachers, painters, Joe DeCamp. And then they suggested he pursue this career, so they sent him to the Boston Museum School, which was a 6-year course. He completes it in 3. He has Tarbell, Benson, Paxton as his teachers, Philip Hale. And he goes off. He wins the Page Traveling Scholarship in 1913. And that's $6,000, $3,000, $2,000. For 2 years in 1913, a lot of money. So he went over to Europe to paint, went to the museums and studied. He ended up in Italy, I think 1914, the outbreak of World War II. So they arrested him as a spy because he was painting. World War I, sorry. Yeah. He was a spy. So as a spy, he had to leave the country. They realized he wasn't a spy, he was just a painter. So he left the country. So he came back to the States, but he always knew he wanted to be a landscape painter. I think that was one of the things he had in mind. And just like Robert Douglas Hunter, when you look at his paintings, I mean, the color is beautiful in this, but I think you see the design first. I had Tommy Heinsohn in one of my workshops, and it was a rainy day, so I decided to do a lecture on Aldro Hibbard, had a lot of slides. And we were describing the dynamic symmetry in his works. If you look at the diagonal here, the diagonal there, the diagonal there, all these wonderful diagonal lines just keep you in the middle of the painting. Well, I was talking about that, and Tommy says, gods, I can't get out of this painting, David. and that's the beauty of a painting. I mean, just think, if you've got a buyer, you've got a painting on the wall, you don't want them out of that painting. I got to go home with this painting because I can't leave. This painting has to come home with me. And Hibbard just was a master at design and composition. And we used to think it was just sort of intuitive because he would never say anything to you about design. That stuff's, you read too many books. But I think he was well trained. One of his color theorist teachers was Edmund Munsell, who was the color theory. Also, he had lessons in dynamic symmetry. I think he digested this so well that he applied it in his work. Because there was one piece we had where we could see he went up and made adjustments, like added an inch to the top of this little evergreen. He put a wall in front of these trees over here. So he's making very minute judgments on the design of the painting. And I think this is a marvelous painting, marvelous design. I love the color in this one too, how he uses the color. He's obviously he's in southern Vermont, Brattleboro, that area. And did these beautiful, beautiful amount of snow in that area, did all these wonderful paintings of Vermont. Loved to paint the winter more than the summer. Summer greens didn't interest him, so he would come back to Rockport in the summer, and he ran a school for about 25 years, from 1920 to 1950, something like that, yeah. So this is, to me, is a great, again, a landscape painter. This is my field. And a landscape has to communicate, and I think one of the things that we all try to do is communicate the seasons first. So we know the season here, right? This is spring, right? Early spring. So this is either end of March and they had a lot of snow disappear, or it's the beginning of April, right? So the other thing a landscape painter does is tell you the time of day. So look at this painting. Where's the sun in this painting? It's up high, isn't it? Because everything is flooded with light. So the sun is off to the right, everybody, right? Off to the right. It's up way high in the sky, bleaching everything out. We can see the old grass and the new grass coming up. He's described this all beautifully. And the last thing a good landscape painter does is tell you the day of the week. And that's obvious, right? Wednesday, right? Wednesday at 1 o'clock, maybe 2. But he does that so perfectly. But no, it's a masterful painting. Look at the values in this painting, how close the values are together. I mean, it's an image, so it's hard to interpret, but how close the buildings are. How everything in the background is very cool, how everything in the foreground is very warm, how the buildings just sort of blend into the background. He echoes the things. If you take the slightest thing away, like if I took that yellow shade out of that window, it wouldn't be as complete as it is now, you know. He was a masterful designer, wonderful designer. He would do, if you look closely in this page, we can see there's like a line, a linear line and he would draw everything out. So when we saw some of these paintings where he didn't put the color in, it would almost look like a paint by numbers. Couldn't tell. You really have to figure out what he was drawing in this because everything was an abstract shape. The shadow would be a shape, the windows, everything was a shape. And then, so he might spend 2 days with just drawings of paintings and then go out and fill them in with the color. But Albert Hibbert was one of the great days we had with Albert Hibbert is he invited my brother and I down and he was going to talk about his paintings. And with Hibbert, though, he really felt he was capturing a bygone era, and he called it the horse and buggy days that he was trying to capture. This is the little village he lived in, Jamaica, Vermont, and the mountains surrounding. Beautiful piece. This is probably an earlier piece. It's a little more refined than the previous piece. But all he would talk about is the nostalgia. Now, the day I painted this painting, they were killing a pig in that barn down there. Horrible sound, horrible sound. But what about, my father said, what about the dynamic symmetry? Yeah, nah. And he didn't want to talk about how he put the paintings together or how he made them. He wanted to talk about what they represented, you know. And he really felt he was capturing time. You hear many of these artists tell you stories, and that's what you think they are, stories. And one of the great stories was he had been painting this ravine, and he went out with the logging guys out of the village. And the logging men said, if you're not here at 3 o'clock when we come back to town, we're not stopping and waiting for you. We're going right to town. So you better be waiting for us, or else you're going to die out here. And so he looks at his watch, 10 minutes to 3. So he packs up his easel, takes his painting, throws it up. Well, it hits a pine tree and falls right into the pine needles. So the painting is embedded with needles, right? And he just let it dry, and he flicks all the needles off once it's dry. So that was the story that was told. Well, I happened to meet the guy who owned the painting. And there was the painting. So the first thing I did was go up, stick my nose in the painting. He said, what are you doing? I said, I just want to check something. And sure enough, there were all the marks from the needles. Now, you'd never see it from 20 feet away, but all the marks were there embedded in the paint. So I knew the stories weren't that far off. So other painters that I met in growing up on Cape Ann, Emile Groupie was so well known, a bigger-than-life character in Gloucester, if you knew him. Marvelous painter. This is a great, great painting of Emile's. Here again, the design. These guys were great designers. Get you into the painting, and then he says, meander around there. Look at that sail, commands the attention. You see the other sail. It almost looks like he puts the sail in afterwards because he needs it. And these guys were great, great designers. I remember my father, who was a dealer, had this groupie. This fellow came in and said, I'd like to buy that, Roger. He said, I want to keep it for a while. Let me hold on to it. So I was looking at it one day and I studied it, and I realized Emile had taken a whole boat out, but he had to leave the mast in. So he connected the mast to another boat. So you would never notice this, but the boat was removed because the eye then moved into the painting. And most of the Italian fishing boats just have this single mast, gold mast. And if he had taken the mast away with the boat, he would have had two masts equidistant on either side, like bookends. So he had to leave the mast. And he got away with it because nobody saw it. So I told my dad, I said, thanks a lot, Dave. You ruined that painting for me. I said, well, doesn't it prove that he's designing and not making an image of a boat? And he says, yeah, but he says he should have seen that in the beginning. He should have not made that mistake. So in comes the guy who wants to buy it. So my father says, before you buy it, my son will tell you a story. I said, well, he's going to ruin the deal here. The deal's going to go down the tubes. And it didn't, because the guy looked at me and says, that made it better because now I know he's not just painting pictures of boats. He's trying to make an interesting design. And that's what these guys were all about. And I learned so many lessons from Emile. The lesson I learned from Emile is I became a new member of the North Shore Art Association up there. And I was also the youngest guy. I was 20 years old, so I had to move the paintings for the jury. So I was moving the painting. My painting was coming up. So I put my painting up there, and Emile was the chairman. He says, this looks okay. It's in, right? All the jury, yeah, it's in. Yeah. So it's like and so sure enough, a little while later, lunchtime comes, and Emile says, Curtis, come here. This is your painting, right? it's too green, it's too green. Throw some red in there, will you? And I said, oh, throw red in there. Wow, I never thought of that. But, you know, when you start thinking about how to neutralize a strong color, you use the complement, right? You use the red next to the green, and he was so right. I think this is a great groupie, and this is the first time since my wife found this. I think it's a great groupie. It really shows you everything about Impressionist thinking. Here again, lost and found we talked about. So the buildings are not as important as the hull of the boat, and it is a hull of a boat, right? And look how abstract the whole mud flat is down here. It's just dots and dabs of color. The boat itself commands it, and he's drawn enough to tell us what it is. He's shown us enough that it's a boat with sunlight hitting it, and he's captured that effect, I think, beautifully in this piece. We had a retrospective show at Rockport. There again, another learning lesson. And I realized that Emile Groupie, probably every painting he did was started and painted and thought about differently than the last painting and the next painting to come. He never did a painting, I think that was the beauty of him. He never had a formula to paint, making a picture, you know. Any questions? Speak right up. Honestly, we can all benefit. I think this is a marvelous painting. You guys agree? Isn't that fabulous? And it is a hull of a ship. The other gentleman that really, and like I said, I didn't study directly with Emile or Eldro Hibbert, but being the young guy in the block, these old guys would always say, take you under their arm. Like, hey, Dave, come over here. And give you pointers. And those little pointers were teaching moments, really. And I learned so much from them. Paul was going to give a lecture at the North Shore, and I had to be there. And I thought, gee, this place would be so crowded, I better get there early. And there was only a dozen people there. I couldn't believe it. So I said, geez, Paul's not going to like this. He was so hot. He was so on for those dozen people. And I remember the woman raising her hand. She says, yes, Mr. Stray, I have a question. What kind of brush do you use? Oh, I don't know. Put it on with your big toe, but put it on right. And Judy later told me that that's a quote from Anthony Teamy, who probably quoted it from somebody else. So these painters get quotes that go way back into time, you know. And it doesn't make any, I mean, I can't tell you what kind of brush he's using for that surf there, or what he did over here. You know, I mean, Russell, the great Western painter, used to use twigs and chew on a twig and paint with that. The technique is personal. It's your business. It's what you like for paint. It's what you like for a medium. It's what you want to use for brushes. I had this student once who came to class. He was using Egberts. Anyone know what an Egbert is? An Egbert's a big, long hair brush. And it's so flexible, it's like you won't hold the paint. And this guy was about 6'5", and he looked like the guy from the Bates Hotel. He's a new student. I was afraid of this guy. I mean, he was just scary. And he says, well, show me what I should do. And he hands me the brushes. I said, what are these? He says, Egberts. Don't you like them? I said, oh, yeah, they're fine. So I said, it doesn't work. They don't work. I said, these are good for tickling. And I got to know him pretty good. He's a very nice guy, good gentleman, and became a very good painter. I think he moved back to Florida, is an outstanding painter down there. Anyway, but Paul was always helping me out with different ideas. One of the sayings he'd always have, windows have personalities. A lot of my students, when they're painting a house, all the windows are identical. You know, look at his windows and his doors, they're all different. There's always something different about each one. And that phrase just rings a bell with a lot of people. But Paul was in the habit of coming in. I was, again, the young guy, so I was hanging the shows at Rockport. And he came in and he would look up and he'd say, Dave, you're tall, so you're hanging them too high. Lower. I said, all right, Paul. Next show I hung, he'd come in. Dave, they're too low. So finally, the third show I'm hanging, he comes around the corner just as the first one's ready to go. I said, Paul, where does this look right? Oh, anywhere you put it. You always do a great job. And that was Paul. I mean, that was what he was like. He was a gentleman, a scholarly gentleman. He came to Rockport probably the late 40s, early 50s. He was a big admirer of Anthony Teamy when he first arrived, so he sort of painted a little bit like Teamy. And then later on, he develops his own style. This is a late piece. He jumps in because Wyeth influenced a lot of us big time. Andrew Wyeth and his son. I was influenced by Jamie. I'll never forget, I always had a picture of the motorcycle guy with the wraparound sunshades on it, really very impressive. Because they were traditional painters. They wanted you to draw something that was recognizable. So we were big admirers of them, as they were then, and the watercolor was the big medium for a lot of these Rockport guys. But the trouble with Wyeth, and he might have had a color blindness or something, but he used tonal qualities in his paintings. I loved color, and I still do to this day. And so it was nice to see when these guys got all back into painting with rich, strong hues and a lot of chroma in their work. Wonderful piece of Paul's. This piece I think is good. So I think this is the one. Here again, I think if we think about the Impressionism that I mentioned before, which is about focus and what is lost and what is found. And obviously the background is cool and lost. The building is the dominant note, is very bright red, and maybe that's where or is it the white boat? Where do you go for it? So he balances the red building beautifully with the white boat. He puts real red notes around, so you see that you can move, he allows you to move around. But I thought the genius was this building in the background, which is a duplicate of the motif. The motif here is duplicated there, and I don't think that building exists. I think he put it there to replicate or to mirror it in the distance, so that the bullseye wasn't on the thing. Red is a tough color. And Timmy used to bring all his classes to paint motif number 1. That's how it became known as motif number 1. Because he'd have a class of 20 people all painting this one building. So the tourists would come to town and say, I guess that's an important building to paint, because look at all these artists. So there's a phrase, Judy, you know the phrase.
Yeah, Oakley owned it, Ownby named it, but Timmy proclaimed.
Right. And I think the proclamation was all these classes, because it was an easy building to render and also to paint the light and the shade on. But it was a red building, which is not an easy thing to do. Sharp edge here in the foreground, a little softer edge in the middle ground, real soft edges in the background. Very simple design, I think very effective. Another influence on all us younger painters up in Cape Ann was Bernard Corey. Bernard Corey had studied a little bit with Paul Strisick, and as he progressed, he went, I think he was a house painter, interior designer, or house designer like that. And then once he retired, he went out and bought a box of cigars, and that box of cigars turned into his new easel. So he did cigar box paintings. And there were little landscapes, fresh little landscapes from nature. And they were fabulous, and we were all thrilled, because so many painters were back in the studio copying photographs, and here was Bernie out there, this old guy, 75, 80 years old out there painting, and he invites you out. Every time he runs, Dave, I want you to come out and paint with me. Sure, okay. But then T.M. Nicholas told me that when he went out and painted with him, there was another guy there, and the other guy made the mistake of packing up 15 minutes before the sun went down, and Bernie lit into him. There's another 15 minutes in this day, and you're packing up. Tommy said, I always learned my lesson. He says, because I was going to pack up too, and he didn't catch me. But he was, we admired his work ethic and him. And these little cigar box paintings, I worked at the Guild of Boston Artists as the gallery manager, and one year I sold 20 of these little cigar box paintings. So I would call Bernie, I'd say, Bernie, I just sold a couple. Can you send me, this is, to me, the beautiful example of his work. Can you send me a couple more, or bring a couple more in? He says, well, Dave, he says, if I come into Boston, somebody could hit me with a car. I'm not coming in that city, that's rough. I said, well, Bernie, I'm selling. He says, yeah, that's good, thanks very much. So I had to get a friend who was in Rockport who would visit Bernie on a regular basis, John Wentworth. John Wentworth, and so John would go out, bring some paintings back to me, deliver them to my house, and I'd bring them into Boston, put them on the bench, and boom, they were gone. He was selling these things, a painting like this for $250, $325. They were, they were funny sizes. They might be 10 by 17, or 9 by 12. They were never just organized sizes. They were always a little off. He'd make the panels himself, and as I said, he used this cigar box. So if it was a rough day, he'd sit in the car and paint. Real good guy.
That's funny.
What, painting the car? Oh, there's so many stories about guys and cars. I mean, there was a guy in Rockport who used to sit up on the roof of his car. There was another guy who cut the floorboards out in his car so he could, stand and paint. Yeah. Yeah. No, there's a lot of nutty. There was, I think, one guy moved to Nantucket to paint, and I don't know if he was allowed down there to do that, to sit on top of his car to paint. Yeah. So another Bernie Corey, and this is a good lesson because I think it looks like here he's got an underpainting of a warm underpainting. So I think that's a good lesson for all of us. Hot summer greens, put a warm underpainting in there, neutralize those greens, right? Too green, watch out for the too green. And so this is a lay-in of Bernie's, I think. Whether he ever got back, probably too hot for him out there. He liked the winter days, But a wonderful gentleman. And now if you look at his paintings online or at auction, sometimes they had gotten up to around $2,000. They're around 15? Between 12 and 15 now for one of those little landscapes at auction. So he's very successful, and he did 2 or 3 a day paintings. Yeah.
Some Bernie Corys in the Rockport Art Association.
Yeah, there's a Rockport Art Association auction. You can see it online, and there'll be some Bernie Corys at that auction. Judy just told me she's on the auction committee. She's not for profit. As many of you volunteer people here, right? Marty Ahern was another good friend, a good mentor. We used to compare. He taught at the same place my dad used to teach, Seaward Inn, and that's where Judy came to stay, and I met her there. One day we were comparing notes about teaching, and I had just begun teaching. Marty told me that he had a class. They were on the docks in Gloucester, and one of the ladies, her brush fell through the cracks in the pier, went down, but it was muddy. So Marty says, I'll go down and get it for you. So, thank you very much. You're a real gentleman. So he's climbing down the ladder. Halfway down the ladder, he goes back up. He says, if I never make it back, don't forget, check your values. And those are the stories you remember, because values are one of those lessons. I mean, I'm a big nut for values. And there's so many people who say, I know what a value is. Take it for granted. But they know the definition of the value. And it's like, to me, it's like you take the driver's test. Do you go 100 miles an hour past the hospital, 20 miles an hour, 15 miles an hour, or make sure your horn's working as you go back? It's obviously 20, right? 20. So it's like you could define a value for me, give me the definition of it. But it's not until you get behind the wheel of the car and drive that thing with all this distraction around you and to understand what it is to drive a car. So a value is a tool. It's a tool to be used. And that tool goes in your toolbox. You can build a birdhouse with a hammer, or you can build a big house with a hammer. It's a tool to be used, and values are so very important. And that's why Marty and I used to chuckle at these stories. My father was a big nut for teaching values. And I met one of his students out on the rocks, and he says, Dave, I stayed with your dad 4 years. All he talked about was values. I said, yeah, and I never knew what a value was. I mean, I knew what it was, but I didn't know what it was, and I understood what he meant. He says, until about 2 weeks ago, I was out painting, and I put down a brushstroke. He said, I understand what a value is. And I think that's what it is. It's the experience of using these values, using a light and dark. How dark do I make it? How light do I make it? Those things make or break a painting. This is a wonderful painting of Marty's. This is the Granite Bridge in Rockport. Does anyone know this scene? So what has he done to this scene to make it a little different?
Put a mountain in.
He put a mountain, right. Yeah, there's no mountain there if you go down there. But I kind of like it, right? It's kind of a nice invention. Because it allows you to just go out into that space. It makes the bridge a little more three-dimensional. But he's totally changed this scene. But who's going to know? And that's the beauty of painting a picture. You don't have to be so literal about setting up. That's why I sort of shun the idea of using photographs. I've never used photographs. Friends of mine who are good painters, they'll actually pixelate a photograph. They'll take a photograph outdoors, but then when they print it on their computer, they'll pixelate it. They're not getting drunk, they're just pixelating the image. and they'll put it down there, and then that's their reference, you know, because you can never get true color. And I think the big thing you're missing out on, I've been ill for about 3 months, so tomorrow is going to be my first attempt at painting outdoors on location. And so this is going to be all new for me, you know. This is the first time I've gone out. And I hope you all go out tomorrow because it's going to be 70 degrees. It's going to be warm. The birds are going to be singing the spring songs. The little blades of grass are going to be poked. The birds are going to, you know, it's going to be a beautiful day out there, and I hope I can make it. Alan Davidson, another influence on me as a teacher. He worked for the State House in Boston as a reporter, but always wanted to paint. He moved to Rockport, became a painter, loved ballerinas, the Degas, influenced by Degas. And he was the one who, I had to work nights in the hospital, refinishing floors to make a living so I could paint during the daytime. And he bumped into me working, you know, mopping a bucket in my hand. He says, "What are you doing?" And I says, "Well, I'm making some money here." And he says, "Well, give me that bucket." He's trying to take it out of my hand. I said, "This is my job. I don't care if you're not doing this. You're not, get out." And that's the way he was. He was very emotional, very excitable. So when he came to the annual meetings, the ladies hated him because he would always stir up trouble. He was a troublemaker, Alan. But I loved the troublemaker. I thought he was great. And we always found ways of getting the troublemaker to be happy. And one day he had a painting of it as a ballerina at the North Shore Art Association, and my father and I and Ken Gore had arranged the show, and he got us a hanging that we thought was good, but he didn't like it. It was in the steel stairwell. It was on this door, and he said, "That's a terrible hanging. I want my dues back, and I'm taking my painting out." This is opening day, and he's going to take his painting down and walk out. Just then, the gallery manager comes up, puts a red dot on it, and it sells. And we said, "You can't take it, Alan. It's already sold." He said, "What do you mean it's sold?" "Yeah, see the red dot? Well, this is a good spot." And that gave us so much pleasure that the cantankerous old guy. But I'll echo the same thing I started this lecture with. Here's Alan, he painting in his way. But look where the focus is. Look what's out of focus. The figure in the foreground's in focus, secondary focus, and then how he loses things. So much so he loses things you can't tell the difference between an instrument and a musician over there. And just so many ways of interpreting this one understanding of what I think is part of the understanding of Impressionism, but the idea of having a focus, you know, to focus on the thing in focus, and then to lose the things that are not important or are not, because we all know there's a little band going on over there. Maybe we don't. Who knows what's going on? I don't know. But no, Alan was a very good, very nice gentleman. Very, very good, very good. And so not to say that the ladies weren't an influence on me, they were. Marion William Steele was a good friend. Used to ride around with her in the car. These ladies, when I was, I think, 7 or 8 years old, I was at an opening of the North Shore Art, and Margaret Fitzhugh Brown. She's got one of these old cars, you know, in 1957, 58, with the big open car with the stick shift in the middle of the floor. She says, "Come on, I'll give you a ride home." It was like Harold and Maude, you know. This little kid, there's this old woman. "Come on, let's have some fun," you know. And Marion Steele was a little bit like that too. She was a wonderful lady, marvelous painter. So she lived near the beach in East Gloucester. She would go down to the beach. Her grandchildren would come for a splash, and she realized that this was like Mary Cassatt painting the kids. Mary Cassatt's secret was they'd have a nap. When they woke up from a nap, she's sort of half awake, not fully awake. That's the time she would paint the mother and child scene. And maybe a little paregoric added in there too. We can't say that though, we can't say that. But Marion Steele had these wonderful kids, and she said, they're in a dream world. They're easy to paint. They're not fussy, they're not fidgety, they're not gonna, you don't want to ask them to stay still because they can't stay still. But what a wonderful scene. This is one of her grandchildren. We don't see as much, I wish we saw more of her work coming out now that she's passed away. But I admired her work tremendously, and she was a lot of fun. She really was. And as I said, the lesson here was that I learned from this was the freedom in which she adapted something like this, and yet she keeps all that water sort of loose. It's a watercolor. She could do beautiful oils. She was not afraid of experimenting. I remember her saying, I said, Marion, is this gold leaf here you have on your painting? She said, actually, that's how I started. I put a piece of gold leaf on a canvas and then painted a painting around it and left the gold to come through. Imagination, is part of this creative process. And it's so important not to stifle the imagination. Harold Speed, if you want some good textbooks on painting, Harold Speed, Dover Publications, they're probably about $10 a piece. One is on drawing and one's on painting. But in it, he says, when you're starting to paint, you want to be a little bit like a child and a little bit like an adult. You want to have the freedom of a child to play at your painting, not to get constrained by, I got to do this and then I got to do this, but play a little bit, but then be the adult to control that play. And I thought that was a great understanding of this, because some of the best paintings come out of this. I mean, when I was a kid, I was watching one of my children play on the floor, and they had soldiers, right? And tanks and things like that. I'm thinking, are these kids thinking about war, destruction, death? What are they thinking about here? And then it dawned on me, no, I don't think he's thinking about that. What is he doing? He's designing. He's playing. That's what it is. It's a design. And if I went down there and moved the tank over here, no, don't. The tank belongs right there. That's where the tank is going to go. And so they're playing with these ideas. And I think that's an important part of this painting, is to tap into your kiddie, what you were like when you were a kid, playing with things, playing with your color forms or whatever it was, and play more, and you'll be surprised at the results are better. Betty Lou Shem, big, and Betty Lou still, I see her on Facebook, talk to her on Facebook, I haven't seen her for a while, but she was a big influence on me when I started teaching. And so when I was teaching I had a workshop, and she had already had a workshop. Her workshops, 20 people. My workshops, I had about 10 people. But I had Tommy Heinsohn in my workshop. He was bigger than everybody else. So I said to Betty Lou, I said, too crowded, Betty Lou, I'll leave, I'll take my class. No, David, stay here, more the merrier. And so she, at the end of the class, she came up to me and she says, you're a good teacher. She said, you spend time with each one of your students. You don't just walk around talking. You spend time with every student. She said, and she began recommending me to all these other workshop places. So she really broke me in to I started doing these, we called it the Cadillac of all workshops, which is a place in upstate New York where they would all stay. We had a studio, there was a swimming pool, nothing to paint, but beautiful, beautiful place to stay. And they'd give you a full breakfast. You made out your menu for lunch at breakfast, what you wanted them, and he would bring it out in the field. Then in the evening, another full dinner. It was really, when he left, I didn't ever want it to return. Okay, so this is about where you guys. These are the 3 organizations I belong to. I've served. You guys are going to study. You celebrate your 60th anniversary. So congratulations. That's a big benchmark. It really is. And it means a lot to do this. It's very difficult. As I said to my organization, I was president of Rockport Art last fall, but got sick and had to retire. And I was happy to do that. But as I said to them, I said, we are a not-for-profit, but that's an oxymoron, because we have to make a profit. So you need your volunteers. You need your members. So I was a volunteer for every one of these organizations as a board member. Served on the board at Rockport 3 terms as a president, served on the board for probably 15 years. North Shore Arts, served on the Arts and Exhibitions Committee there, and I loved every one of these organizations. The Guild of Boston Artists, an honored organization to be a member of, served on the board there. So I think it's very important that you participate in your organizations. Think of it this way. You go out, you find a gallery that you like, 50% they're going to take. That's half. I mean, 50%. Nothing's 50%, but the art galleries are. How much does your organization take if you sell a painting here? Nothing. Nothing? Really? Nothing? So there you go. So support your local art organization. I mean, I got to pay. The Guild is 40%. I think the others are 40% too. But it's a lot better than 50, half that they're taking. My father always had a formula for this. The price you start with is the price you want to put in your pocket. Then you double it. And then you include the frame and you double the cost of your frame. Because if that frame gets nicked, buyer is right, Hey, you got a nicked frame here, I want a new one. Okay, I can do that for you. So you put, that's how you come up with your final price. Which, when you think of it, it's a lot better to have an organization like this where maybe you don't have to raise your prices so high. This is, as I said before, I was fortunate enough to marry this beautiful English girl. She got a little homesick after about, 4 years, 5 years living in the States. And I had the good fortune of working for the Guild of Boston Artists and worked on commission and did very well. So I said, well, let's go to England, you know. And she said, oh, then you don't have to, David. Oh, I'd like to. You know, this is a typical summer's day in August. It's probably 65 degrees. There's no biting insects, and there's nothing. It's just, and the sun doesn't go down till 9:30, 10 o'clock at night. We used to have trouble putting the kids to bed because, what do you mean you want me to go to bed? The sun's still up. The sun would never set until very, late in the day. So the evenings were beautiful to us. It was an all-day affair to paint, and beautiful countryside like this. So this particular piece was a learning point for me from my wife. It was my teacher on this one. So I had gone out, and this isn't the painting, but I had done something similar. These sheep were going up underneath the midday, going up into the shadows of this is a hill with these scrub oaks along the side of it. And the sheep would go underneath, so I painted. I worked about 4.5 hours on this painting. It was about a half hour away from home, so I got home. Judy's cooking supper. I said, so what do you think? Well, it's not your usual self. I said, well, wait a minute here. This is really good. This is 4.5 hours of work. Okay, I'm not going to argue. And to this day, we've never had an argument, right? Because there's no arguing here. I'm going back, and the kids were wanting to be fed and everything. So I just said to myself, I'll show her that this is a great painting. Right? So I hop in a week later, paint's dry, I'm going to go out and work on it some more. So I'm heading out to location. Halfway there, it's the doubt. What did she see that I don't see? What's wrong with the painting? Blah, 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 blah. All of a sudden I realize there is something wrong with this, right? So I'm driving along, and I'm not too far from where I'm going to paint. I see this scene, which has this big ash tree in the middle on the side of the hill. The other ones had scrub oaks, which are all about the same size, and that was probably one of the problems. Yeah. And this one had the same thing, and a beautiful ash tree. I laid it in about 3 hours, went home, and she said, now that's more like it. So your own best critics. You always can learn from somebody with a fresh eye. Now just don't be too fresh. Fresh guy with a fresh eye, but not too fresh. This is another location in Yorkshire. This was a place called Brimham Rocks. And I really enjoyed it because of these unusual, this is grit stone, which is like sandstone over here, or it's gray. And so the rains and the elements really, it just dissipates. And the Victorians had wandered around these rocks and had named them all, given them all unusual names. And I forgot the names of these rocks that they had named, but I love the place. And I met the caretaker. This was a National Trust. And the caretaker there said, oh, you just missed, they were filming The Hound of the Baskervilles up here. And I said, yeah, I can see that, And I always wanted to paint a gray day. I was a sunny day painter. I always wanted to go out and say, how do I paint a gray day? And it was all compliments. I didn't have black and white. I had white, but not black. And so it was all compliments. Too green for the gray, then I'd add more red, and then too blue, add more orange, until I really got the tones of gray I wanted to. And I always liked this piece. I almost sold it twice, and the person would bring it back and say, my wife hated it, couldn't live with it. Too depressing, And I thought, well, I can understand that. I can get along with that. So I had it, and this good student of mine came along, and she says, David, I'd like to buy this painting. I said, and she was bipolar, I knew that. And I says, Jan, no. I said, look, you can take it home and live with it for a while, but I don't think you should have it. She said, I said I want to buy that painting. And I said, no, Jan, think about it. It's not good, probably not good. It's depressing, don't you think? I said I want to buy it. And she takes out, she said, I have the checkbook here. I want to buy that painting. And then she looks at me, she said, and I want to buy that one too. So just give me the price. And here I am talking her out of the sale, right? I don't know if you guys go through that, but I see all the problems in the painting. I don't see it's any good. It's got a lot of mistakes. It's got a problem. I got to fix it. And what do I do to fix it? And I don't know. It's a problem to be solved. This is more recent, huh?
Did you sell
She bought it, yeah,
Okay.
yeah, she bought it. Yeah, she probably resold it too. So this is, because it was depressing. So this is a painting I did last spring. Last spring I did a long trip with some buddies down to West Virginia. So we saw end of April, so I saw spring unfold all the way down the Shenandoah Valley. And then saw our second spring all the way back. So by the time I got back to Cape Ann, I'd seen so much of spring. I thought I really had. And the challenge for spring is the rich green grass. The grass is so dark and blue-green. It's so fresh, but if you paint it dark and blue-green, it just looks horrible. So I said, no, I want to tell the truth here. So I did, and I thought I really got this, the green grass in the early spring. So one of my collectors came by and looked at the piece, and I said, so I think this is a real good piece of mine. She said, David, you've always told me, you got the wall right in the middle. And so when she saw it, there wasn't a whole wall there. The path wasn't there. So she says, you've always told me that. And I said, yeah, but, you know. And so I asked another student of mine, I says, what do you think? Is the wall in? Yes, it is. So I said, okay. So I opened it up, and yeah, sure enough, it sold, right? So, you know, painting is not an individual thing. You know, I think, who was the fellow who said, I think it was Tennyson, who says, you know, God gives us love, but then he gives us something to share, to love and share. And I think this is what it is in painting, is something to share. I can't I'm not Pygmalion. I can't fall in love with what I'm doing. And so I just have to keep on doing it. So it's I'm glad that these things are loaned to me. This is a little painting of a little place I call home. No, this is the Essex Greenbelt where I do all my teaching. And this was the headquarters many years ago. And I really enjoyed this. Since then, they've added on an addition, because the Greenbelt collects properties, buys up properties, and gives them back to the public. Very nice institution. So they added on this piece. And I remember talking to the land trust guy. They're all good. They're really good to me. They've been very nice to me. And I give them a painting every year for Art in the Barn, and they auction it off to raise funds. But so anyway, the land trust guy says, Dave, we're going to add on here. I says, oh, good. Well, that'll be good for you guys. He says, yeah, we'll have offices everywhere. I said, so what are you going to do with the barn there? He says, what are you talking about? I said, well, you know, Judy used to talk about feng shui. Is that feng shui? Feng shui. And so I said, well, the feng shui is all off. Yeah, I had to use that word, right? I didn't know anything about it. He says, the barn is blocking the energy to your front entrance. Well, I'm not moving the damn barn. Forget about that. And of course, they moved the barn. Not because I said that, but because it dawned on them too, you know, that you didn't see the front door. But I enjoyed this. I enjoyed this painting. Here's another painting from Essex. This is just a quick 9x12 sketch. One day, one shot, maybe 3 hours out there. I saw the scene. The composition came together. Made some adjustment. I think there was not 2 trees on the left, but 1. So I added a second tree. But I thought it made a natural composition. And here again, I'm trying to paint the effect of light coming through the trees.
On a Wednesday?
This is actually, yes, you're right. It is a Wednesday. And you know the time of day, right? Tells you the time of day. It's midday again, right? And it's what time of summer? Can you tell? Anyone tell? It's late summer, because the grass has turned gold. Yeah, so it's probably end of August, September. Yeah, very nice. And this is the last piece. This is again back to England. This is a place called Brimham Rocks, and as I said, the Victorians named this. This is called the Hammer and the Anvil, and this is probably, believe it or not, probably 3 o'clock in the afternoon when I painted this, because the sun, opposite of what it did in the summertime, in the wintertime, of course, the sun would set earlier. So it's 3 o'clock in the afternoon. I'm up there painting this, and I want to have a good look at. It's very lonely up there this time of year. I want to have a good look at the painting, so I take my 20-foot back, pick out my 20-foot brush, walk back 20 feet, and the gust of wind comes along, and it was almost like a person came along and pushed the whole easel over. It was the funniest feeling. Like there was no wind that day at all, but it just happened. And it was like, so I thought it was spooky. Anyway, it went in moss. Underneath the snow was all moss. So the painting was wet, embedded in moss. So I brought it home, and I love this hammer and the anvil painting so much that I waited very patiently, took off all the moss, and then filled in the spaces with white, let that dry, brought it back, and completed the hammer and the anvil. And this is another one. So in reading, remembering the guy telling me about the Hound of the Baskervilles, I called this the edge of a grimpen, which in Arthur Conan Doyle's book, the Baskerville Manor was built on the edge of a grimpen mire. And that's sort of, this is a very primitive area. I mean, this probably goes back, hundreds of thousands of years that these stones were formed and placed there, and with the seas and whatever was there underneath it. But it was a wonderful game. Matter of fact, my son is here today, and he was probably about 5 or 6 when we lived there. And so we decided to go up there in the spring and just hang out. And all of a sudden, this cuckoo, cuckoo. And I said, geez, what is that? Oh, that's and he says, that's the first cuckoo of spring. And it was very, I couldn't say it. So thank you very much for having me down for this. I hope you all enjoyed it. And like I said, support your organization. Thank you. Any questions? Yes?
Was the crescent in the sky, was
No.
that?
Nope.
What
No.
do we know?
I put it in.
Okay.
Artistic, what we call artistic license.
I was gonna say,
So you'll always carry your artistic license as well as your real license. I think there's a New Yorker cartoon in which he used that, and the cartoon shows this hippie sitting in the car, and the policeman saying, "Can I see your license?" He says, "What's this?" He says, "That's my artistic license." So remember, you're all granted one artistic license to put something in the sky or add a bird or something like that. I'm sure the moon was there at some point in time. But I think it added a little drama to it, yes. Yeah, thank you. Any other questions? Yes. Yes.
The drawing system where you measure everything, what was the name of that?
Well, I'll use the Bog system. That was Gamel's system because he wanted to make sure you got it right. And that's measuring everything, and from a certain point, it's the site size method is what we're talking about. But even the site size method, it's a portrait system. So the portrait sitter would sit here, and right next to him would be the canvas, and they just transfer the portrait of the person right onto the canvas. The exact size the head is there, from that distance, is put on the canvas. The site size method. And that's mostly a portrait system that they use. But it really helped me a lot because, like I said, I was farsighted. If we were drawing figures, my nude girl would always be 6'2", not 5'8". She was always too tall. So the teacher would come in and say, "David, start from the feet and work up." Still too tall. Okay, start from the belly button, go down, and start from the belly, go up, until I got it right. And then I'd have to think, squeeze it, making it. But it taught me a lot about how to see. And I'm a landscape painter, so farsightedness is very good for me. To make things a little bit bigger and more monumental in a landscape is probably better off to do that way. So I found my niche was to be a landscape painter rather than a studio painter. And I'm sort of glad because I really enjoy being outdoors in nature. I think the first time I went out painting a landscape, in the first year back to Gloucester, I was in the woods and there were these 2 beautiful birds. I thought they were escaped parakeets. I didn't know what they were. Good-sized birds, multiple colors all over them as a pair. And they're looking at me like, what the heck is that? And I'm looking at them, what are they? And so I went out and bought a bird book, find out they were grosbeaks. Never saw a grosbeak since then. But my first sighting was a grosbeak. I always thought that was great. And now I know, if I'm sitting out there for 3 hours, I'm going to know every bird that lives in that area and what they're doing and what they're talking about. They talk, I mean, supposedly it's one of the theories now is that's how we learned a language was from birds, not from chimpanzees. We learned it from birds because birds, if you listen really carefully, they're not repeating themselves. They don't go ba-doop, 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 ba-doop. They go ba-doop, 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 ba-doop. You know, they change it. It's different. Hey, if somebody was here, if I was speaking in Russian, you'd never know a word I said, right? I don't know why I said Russian. But you wouldn't understand a word I said. So, I mean, birds have a little vernacular or language of their own, you know. And so I learned a lot about birds, learned a lot about animals, ticks, you know. But I do enjoy nature and I live out there. I think the last trip out there, I was out and this fellow was walking by with his dog and he says, "Oh, setting up the paint, are you?" I says, "You know, I'm not sure." Because it's so beautiful just to be outdoors. And so I'm looking forward to my first day out. And how many people are planning to go out to paint tomorrow? No. Oh, we got one? Oh, with several. This is good. This is good. This is good. Good inspiration, yeah. There's not much to paint out there. Not much in live, but very good. Any other questions?
How do you go about naming your paintings?
Naming them, well, I learned my lesson from a Trees Gallery. This many years ago. Trees Gallery is owned by some friends of mine, friends of Bob Hunter's. And every year I'd give them paintings, they'd bring them back. No sales. And so I thought they'd dump me. The third year they said, "Well, we can't sell next year, Dave." I says, "So you really want me back?" She said, "Oh yeah, we love your work." And she says, "But you might want to change your titles." So I'm driving home and I'm thinking, change my titles? What does that got to do with anything? Nobody looks at titles. Well, of course I was titling things for the Cape, Essex Marsh, sand dunes at Wingasheek, things like that. So I take all those literal names out because somebody from Seattle is going to come by. I know exactly where that road is, and you painted it just down the street, you know. So make it very generic, you know. Just you know, sunny day, Tuesday at 2 o'clock, you know, anything but where it is. Because as soon as you name it, somebody's going to say, "Oh, it's not, you know, oh, it's Essex." Oh, forget it. You know. So when you literally name it, that seems, it could disappoint a person too, you know, think of it that way, that the person was really anticipating that this was someplace they knew, and you're telling them no.
So did it make a difference?
It did make a difference, yes, the next year I sold, yeah. Yeah, they're wonderful, they're nice, and I think they moved to Arizona, yeah. Ruth and Frank Hogan. Yes,
And David, thank you very much, it was really enjoyable.
thank you.
My question I have is, because I'm a new artist, and I don't get up to the North Shore as often as I would like, but I was up in Rockport in January, and one thing that struck me, that there were only a few galleries compared to several years ago. So my question is this: how has the art colony or community in the North Shore area changed now? How would it compare to maybe in the 50s or 60s when these artists that were friends with you and you were a little boy, how would it compare? Like, what kind of changes are occurring? What are the trends? Or
I think there's a down, but I've seen the ups and downs before.
Right.
And the old adage is you don't give up. You know, actually you sort of like a downtime because then you start painting. One of my friends told me many years ago, "David, always have an inventory of at least 25 paintings." And I said, "Really? Why?" He says, "Because I replace so many artists who are supposed to have solo shows, can't come up with the quota, so they call me because I'm dependable. Yeah, I got 25, I'll bring them in." So it's always important to have an inventory. Yeah, it's a downtime. It has been a downtime for the last 3 or 4 years for art. People can't collect art, buy art. And it will bounce back. The pendulum swings, you know. What's in vogue today? You know, my teacher never thought he'd see the day when abstract art would fail and traditional art would be in. He thought it was the end of traditional painting, good solid craftsmanship, you know. But it's come back, and I think the day will come back with people, because I think art, as we discussed, art is it's a very simple, humble thing that people can enjoy. I remember bringing a painting in to the gallery and the guild when I was a member of the guild. Still am a member, but I brought a painting, and the manager looked at it and said, "Oh, that's my grandmother's garden. I'd like to buy that. Do you mind?" I said, "I don't know. Take it," you know. And so nostalgia plays a part in this. As I said before, I think now that it's a downtime, I'm going to recommend to members of the art association that we try to do a lot with art appreciation. You know, let's tell people about what art is. A lot of people are afraid. A lot of people, very wealthy people, have interior decorators telling them what to put on their walls, rather than them going out and say, "You know, I like guys fishing in streams. Do you mind if I collect those?" "No, you should. Those aren't in." You know, anything you like is in, right? I mean, if you like it, you put it on the wall. That's what good art is. Art's at the beauty's in the eye of the beholder. It has nothing to do with what is good. That's your opinion, right? I mean, if you like abstract, you put abstract up. But so I do think, yes, it has changed. I think it's changed more in the last 5 years than if you were in Rockport maybe 6 years ago. It might be a little more active. I mean, galleries have shut down, like John Terralick is shut down. Paul Strisick, of course, is out. There's a lot of the galleries are shut down, like you said. But it will bounce back. The trouble with Rockport was always that people came to Rockport expecting a deal. It was like the factory makes the best clothing, you know. So if we go to the factory, we can get a cheap overcoat, right? So they came there expecting inexpensive paintings or something like that. So a lot of but the artists are moving. I mean, the artists are going all over. They're going to Texas, they're going to California, they move their work around. As I said, sales happen, they don't happen. But I've always been a teacher. My father sort of taught me that. I've never gotten into the dealing phase, but a teacher and a painter, and those two things. The teaching can drain you of your painting production, so I try to keep my teaching down to a few workshops and then a regular class. The reason why I do the regular Saturday class is because years ago in Gloucester, Emil Gruppi always had a regular Saturday class. My father always taught regularly at Raves Chasm in Magnolia, and there was Arthur Safford at Rocky Neck. And the reason why they really did it was to bring people to the town, to look at the other galleries and things. And then I thought, but that's a great thing. And I had so many students who said, you don't have to sign up. You can just drop in. It's a drop-in class. So I think I've sort of carried on the tradition a little bit, and I enjoy it. It's a nice day out, Saturday day out. When the kids were little, it was always pizza that night because it was a Saturday. Any other questions?
Are you going to be starting up those classes again?
Yes, as soon as I get my legs underneath me, I'll be outdoors. I'm planning on May 1st. And I'll probably have 2 of my students who are still my students, but they're still teachers of their own right, so they'll pitch in a little bit. Yeah, and there's workshops. If anybody's interested in, Judy has workshop notices, and I think there's a little newsletter in there talking about hard and soft edges, lost and found, and a little biography about Willard Metcalf. So if you're interested, talk to Judy. She'll be happy to. And like I said, Judy's a great one for writing. She's produced maybe a dozen books up to now, books and catalogs. Charles Movali, wonderful painter, has a show at the Cape Ann Historical. If you get up there, it's a great show. Judy designed and wrote the catalog for that show. So it really is a wonderful show. It's up for the month of into May. May 21st. It really is a good show. If you knew Charlie's work and Charlie Movali, wonderful sense of color and design in his work. Great. And then we have some great shows. Polythea Starr in Rockport in end of October into November. Very, very fine Boston painter. Beautiful work. She did very imaginative work, still traditional, but she thought outside the box. She wasn't just doing a traditional landscape for the sake of it. Very, very interesting. And then Rudy Caleo will be in December at Rockport. So 2 really good shows. And Judy will design and write both of those catalogs. As I said, she's not for profit. But very good. Thank you all very much.